Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patty Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. I'm Kristin Harmel.
I'm Kristy Woodson Harvey.
And this is Friends and Fiction. We are 4 New York Times bestselling authors who gather every week to pull back the curtain on the writing life and talk about the books you'll cancel your plans to read.
In addition to this web show, we have a Facebook group of more than 340,000 members, a YouTube channel, a podcast, an Instagram feed, a separate book club, and a killer newsletter on Substack. We are a book community like no other.
We love the story behind the story and talking about that moment when a book grabs you and won't let go. And we are here tonight, just like we have been once a week for the past 6 years, to do just that.
You can find out more about us and all we have to offer at friendsandfiction.com.
Now, tonight, we are excited to take you behind the pages of the new novel, Daughters of the Sun and Moon, with author Lisa See. Lisa is the New York Times bestselling author of several novels, including Lady Tan's Circle of Women, The Island of Sea Women, and Dreams of Joy, which debuted at number 1.
She's also the author of On Gold Mountain, which tells the story of her Chinese-American family's settlement in Los Angeles. Lisa was the recipient of the Golden Spike Award from the Chinese Historical Association of Southern California and the Historymakers Award from the Chinese American Museum. Lisa was also named National Woman of the Year by the Organization of Chinese American Women in 2001. She was born in Paris, which is probably why Kristin loves her so much, but grew up and lives now in Los Angeles.
My second favorite city after Paris. So her new novel, Daughters of the Sun and Moon, was just released earlier this month on June 9th. In it, Lisa draws on the vibrancy and turmoil of post-Civil War Los Angeles to tell the story of 3 Chinese women who managed to survive and eventually thrive despite all odds.
But before we get into Daughters of the Sun and Moon, there are a couple housekeeping items to talk about. Among all the amazing things we do at Friends and Fiction, we want to make sure you're not missing out on our newsletter on Substack. There's some incredible content there, including an exclusive bonus Q&A this week with Lisa. We also run exclusive to our Substack interviews, like the recent ones we did with Stephen Rowley, Laurie Gilmore, and Melanie Benjamin. And we also occasionally run roundtable chats and giveaways, like MKA's recent one with 11 Beach Reads authors. You do not want to miss out on all of this amazing extra content, so make sure you are subscribed.
And you definitely do not want to forget about the Friends and Fiction 2026 subscription box available exclusively through Oxford Exchange. Sign up for that for one all-in price, and the bookstore will send you Kristy's and MKA's new books right away, and then my new title as soon as it releases in July. And each autographed book comes with a special exclusive Friends and Fiction branded gift available only in this package. I just got my Mary Kay package the other day, which was great. So visit Oxford Exchange to get yours while supplies last. All right. Now let's dig in finally with Lisa. I feel like that was like a lot of housekeeping items.
I
feel like it was all front loaded that time. All right, Sean, would you mind bringing Lisa on, please?
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
So nice to see you both.
Good to see
you.
you too. Welcome to Friends and Fiction.
Yeah. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, we are very happy you're here. All right. So Daughters of the Sun and Moon is such an achingly gorgeous book about a very dark moment in American history, the real-life Night of Horrors, in which at least 19 Chinese immigrants were brutally murdered in 1871 Los Angeles. But the novel is also very much the story of 3 women from different walks of life and different backgrounds, Dove, Moon, and Petal, finding their way to each other and surviving the unthinkable, even before the murders happen. In a starred review, Library Journal said, "See offers a stunning piece of historical fiction based in truth. It will touch readers with the characters' resilience, heroism, and devoted friendship. Lisa, can you tell us a bit more about this beautiful book?
Well, first of all, what a bunch of beautiful words right there. Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I think you kind of touched on the plot a little bit. It's three women who come from China, come from very different backgrounds in 1870 to Los Angeles. And most people don't know this, but Los Angeles in 1870 was only about 5,000 people. By contrast, San Francisco was already 150,000 people. So tiny,
Wow.
dirty, extraordinarily violent. Considered to be one of the most, if not the most violent of all the Wild West towns. And so of those 5,000, there are about 180 Chinese, and of that 180, 34 Chinese women. So this story is inspired by three real women who were here at that time.
That's awesome. Well, we're excited to dig into talking about those women and the real inspiration behind the story in a minute. But first, I wanted to ask you, this is a question we always ask on Friends in Fiction. You told us a little bit about what the book's about, but can you tell us now what the book is really about at its core?
Oh, I think at its core, it's about friendship. Friendship is something I come back to again and again and again. I think we will tell this is a unique relationship we have in our lives, right? We will tell a friend something that we wouldn't tell a boyfriend, a husband, a lover, your mother, your children, your wife, if you have one. It's a very, very unique relationship. And of course, whenever you have your heart open, you are vulnerable to being hurt. And so for all the incredible things that we get from friendship, someone to laugh with, someone to go to the movies with, play tennis with, go out to lunch with, take a walk with, all of those wonderful things, someone to cry on their shoulder. There are those kind of dark shadow sides because this is someone who knows you in a very particular and very intimate way. And so wherever I see those dark shadows, I also want to go there. But mainly, I think it's that sense of sisterhood that we get from friendship and the support that we get from friendship, even under the most difficult circumstances. And in fact, it's those most difficult circumstances that we need our friends the most.
It's so true. Absolutely.
That's really beautifully said. I love the dark shadow side of that. I think I hadn't really put a lot of thought into that before, but you're so right. I think that is one of the most compelling things about writing about friendship.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So to truly understand this story on a gut level, I think we have to understand where all three of the main characters have come from and why this life in the tiny wilderness of Los Angeles before the city's population boom, as you mentioned, meant so much to each of them. So can you tell us first a little bit more about Dove? How did she come to be in Los Angeles, and what's her life like when she gets there?
So again, she's inspired by a real woman who was brought here when she was 15 in an arranged marriage to a much, much older Chinese merchant who was described in the local press of the day as being hideously ugly. That's something you want to have in the newspaper, right? But there it was, over and over again. And she was here for not very long before she was kidnapped and held captive for about 6 months. And so there were people at the time, but scholars even today, who believe that her kidnapping is the initial spark for what will happen on the night of horror. So even though it happened 6 months earlier, it is that, it's that one escalation that will push things over the edge.
Wow. Okay, so Petal's circumstances are very different from Dove's, both on the journey to America and what becomes of her when she arrives. Can you tell us about Petal?
Yeah. So she's inspired by two real women. And these were young women who were sold by their families in China, brought here, and then sold into prostitution. This isn't long after the end of the Civil War. Slavery's been outlawed. It's in our Constitution. But there was this one exception, and it had to do with the sale and ownership of Chinese women in the state of California.
Wow.
And so in real life, these two women, from the moment they got here, they did everything they could to escape and find freedom. So everything that happens to Petal happened to these two women in real life. And I know I shouldn't say this. It's like picking which is your favorite child. You're not supposed to ever say, but she is my favorite character. I just found both of those women, who then became this character, to be so inspiring. Their persistence, their endurance, their courage, and coming from nothing and still having this real sense of self, of their self-worth and value that I find inspirational all the way to today.
It's especially interesting in light of, isn't she known in her family as
worthless girl?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So to find that self-confidence despite that, it's incredible.
Yeah. And to have that sense of, I'm not worthless. I am worth it.
Yeah.
And what she does over and over again to prove it, in a way, she's kind of proving it to herself, but also to the outside world.
Yeah, which I think is amazing because, it's hard enough when you have people telling you how wonderful you are all the time to be able to really find that confidence inside yourself. So she's an amazing character. Okay, so finally, Moon is a bit older and wiser, and she becomes in some ways the glue that will ultimately hold them all together. So tell us about Moon.
She was the real life wife of the Chinese doctor in Los Angeles. Again, not very many people here. He was the most prominent Chinese. It's an interesting thing. Again, it's right after the Civil War. We know that Western medicine was really, really backward, but Chinese medicine had been around for a couple thousand years. So throughout the West, in small towns, but also in big cities, you would find doctors of Chinese medicine, because people felt more comfortable going to a Chinese doctor who had knowledge than a snake oil salesman or someone who was just going to saw off your leg, something like that. Yeah. So he was the most prominent Chinese in Los Angeles. He spoke 4 languages. He saw people in his rooms, but he also had a clinic in the white part of town where he saw white patients. Again, he had a sign that he spoke 4 languages. Anyway, she was his wife, and not a whole lot is known about her. Just a few. First, she was his wife. That she had a little white poodle, and this was one of those details that is in the local newspapers of the day, that she had this little white poodle. And I'm telling you, I still think about, how did that poodle get here? And I think it's one of the questions for book clubs is, how do you think the poodle got here? Because a little tiny white poodle in 1870 in this tiny, dirty town is just a crazy thing to me. And then she was present when her husband was killed. He was the second person killed. And in real life, she went on to file a lawsuit against the city. And she became the first Chinese woman in the United States to do anything like that.
Oh, wow.
To really fight for herself, to fight for justice.
They're all such incredible characters on the page, but to think that they were based on these real women, these real women who were so incredible in their own right. It's just extraordinary. What inspiration you must have drawn from those real lives that were lived.
Yes, absolutely. And, this is something that's in all of my books, I think, of going back and finding these women, whether they were real women or inspired by a group of women who were doing something really unique. I think so often we hear about women in the past. There were no women authors, there were no women writers, there were no women architects, no women historians, there were women, but supposedly they didn't do anything. But all these women before us did so much, and we, we're here talking, but we're riding on their shoulders. No matter where you are in the world, we're riding on the shoulders of the women who came before us, and And
Sure.
so for me to go back and find those women who I find to be particularly inspiring is really what drives all of my writing.
Mm.
That's incredible. And I feel similarly. I mean, I read a lot about World War II and about
Yeah.
the women whose contributions were not always honored, when we talk about that war. But it's nice. I feel like historical fiction these days is beginning to change the narrative about how the past really unfolded.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly women's part in it. We typically learn history. I think of it as like the front line of history, the wars, the dates, the presidents, the generals, the battles. But if you take one step back, who's there? It's women, it's families, and they're there every step of the way. And like in both of your writing, that what women were doing, it's not like all of a sudden there was a feminist movement.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Right. That's exactly right. And it was built up in some way.
Yeah, or just that women were doing so much. It's just what they did was lost, forgotten, sometimes deliberately covered up.
Yeah, you were 100% right. Well, nice to have a book like this to really to adjust that record with true historical accuracy. I think it's awesome. So, from a storytelling kind of craft perspective, I found it really interesting that you chose to have Moon speaking in retrospect as an older woman, Petal speaking in present tense as she lives her story.
Right.
And Dove in the present too, but told in third person from a little bit of a distance.
Mhm.
Can you talk us through these narrative choices and whether it took a little bit of trial and error to figure out the right way to tell the story?
You see, only writers would ask that question. So thank you. Well, originally I was going to tell the story completely through Moon's eyes, but
Interesting.
really pretty early on, these separate ways of telling the story came to me. I'm going to start with Dove. So often we hear about women being objectified. Well, in many ways, she is like an object. She is in the press of the day. She's described as her husband's pet lamb. I mean, they have all of these ways of describing her after she's been kidnapped, not as a young 15-year-old who's been kidnapped, but as this like, the little jewel, the pet lamb. And then I don't think this gives much away because I've already talked about her kidnapping, but in real life, that whole process, she's kidnapped, she's rescued, she's kidnapped, she's rescued, and she's passed around and goes in and out of these different courtrooms where nobody helps her. But it's almost like she's a package being passed from person to person. And so I thought it would be really interesting to try to tell her story, from that remove. And that could there be a point where she could become her own person and have real say in what happens to her? Now, in real life, I have no idea. I gave her that ending because I wanted it for her. And then with Petal, as you said, she's just living it in the moment. And that's pretty self-explanatory. You're just with her every step of the way. And then with Moon, this really grew out of the fact that as I thought about my own perceptions of Los Angeles, I've lived here my whole life. I'm fourth or fifth generation. Even when I think about Los Angeles in the early days, I have these ideas of things that I've seen in old movies, maybe from the 30s, detective movies or musicals, things like that. And I felt I wouldn't be the only one who would have no idea of what this little pueblo was like. And so to have her telling, from 1926, what the city is like now, her first scene, she's like, nobody can believe what it was like because today we have airplanes and there are cars and there are 1 million people living here, and much more, I think, for how all of us sort of view Los Angeles if we, think about the past. But this is so far, this story takes place way before that. So she actually has the perspective to put not only Los Angeles, again, into perspective, but also as we age, I think we grow in wisdom, we learn things, we look at things that happened in the past a little differently. And so when she's telling her story, she can comment on it in a way that the other characters can't because they're in it right at the moment.
I thought it was such an interesting way to tell the story. It was, I don't think I had seen something narratively unfold quite like that before, but it really worked. I think you chose exactly the right viewpoints for each character.
Well, I have to say I was really worried about, and I still am, will readers you follow it? I mean, it's not the usual structure for a book, but also just in terms of the writing, and I think you both would appreciate this, what gets revealed when?
Yes.
And so Moon knows everything, but she can't tell that to everybody on page 1. Otherwise there wouldn't be a story. How and when things get revealed, that was really challenging, but also fun, because it's like a puzzle. And there's so many aspects to writing a novel, as you know, that is like a puzzle. Where am I putting in that piece to create this full picture?
Absolutely.
Well, you handled it perfectly.
Yeah.
So, Lisa, we definitely want to hear more about this horrible massacre around which this novel ultimately revolves. And we know that you wrote about it also in On Gold Mountain, your family memoir, which came out about 30 years ago.
30 years ago, about something like that.
Yeah. So can you set the scene for us by telling us what LA was like in the early 1870s for Chinese immigrants?
Well, it would have been very difficult, certainly. They didn't have any rights. They couldn't testify in court against someone who was white. So they were very easily victimized with no recourse available to them. The opportunities for work, of course, were very limited. Dr. Tong is an exception because he was a professional man. But other than that, it was mostly laborers, people who did laundry, washed dishes in restaurants, worked in the fields. So the opportunities for them were very limited, and then the overall level of discrimination was very high. And yet these were people who came here, like immigrants even today, trying to find a better life, trying to earn money that they could send home to their families. So in many ways, obviously this takes place a long time ago, but there are elements of the story that I think still resonate today because we are, again, a nation of immigrants, and that's an ongoing process for our nation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yes. And just, if it's not too horrible to talk about, can you tell us exactly, how did this night of horrors unfold? We know that's something that...
Right. So it's, there are two rival gangs. And I think like anything where there's a conflict, right? Somebody does something here, and then you raise the level here, and then you raise the level here. Somebody gets into a fist fight on the street. Next time there might be a stabbing. Next time there's a shoot 'em up. I mean, Los Angeles, when I say it was one of the most violent towns, if not the most violent, there were shoot 'em ups on the street every day. It had a higher percentage of murders per capita than San Francisco. Than New York. Really, really violent. And so you can see how just things start to escalate. It's just like with any kind of war, right? Yeah. One side does this, the next side, and you're escalating until there comes this time where there is yet another shoot 'em up on the street, and a policeman gets shot in the shoulder. And a white rancher comes along to help, comes out with his guns, shooting and everything, and to help. And he was shot and killed. And the phrase at the time that was reported was, they're killing whites wholesale. And so 10% of the population, around 500, a little more than 500 people, descended on this one area and then killed 10% of the Chinese, so 18 men and boys. And all this violence takes place in about 4 hours. To me, I mean, yes, the story is building towards that and what's going to happen to these women as you're moving towards it. But I also think a lot about how that time still is reflected today, and how you can sort of apply what happened then to today.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually want to dig in about that in just a minute. But first,
speaking of, we're going to ask you that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I wanted to talk to you about.
I love that you just stopped because great.
I was like, oh no, she's going to
I would have to make any alterations.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and ask your question, because there was one other thing I was going to say about it, but go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
You know, so after this massacre, I mean, this is a transformative moment for Los Angeles, and what happened was took the Great Chicago Fire off the front page worldwide, pushed it off the front page. This was international news.
Wow.
And Los Angeles, you know, again, tiny, but it was just at the start of a land boom. And one of the big things was where the Transcontinental Railroad had been completed, but how do you connect it to Southern California? Yeah. And so there was this whole discussion of, well, where is the railroad going next? Is it going to go to San Bernardino, to Wilmington, to Los Angeles? And of course, everybody, the city fathers, were very, very worried. Like, okay, it's going to bypass us now that all this bad news has happened. So two things happened simultaneously. One is that city fathers tried to create this false scenario of Los Angeles is really safe. You know, they erased everything that had happened. They took away the street. They demolished the buildings. They never spoke about it again. This is why we don't know about it. But it was all in an effort to promote this land boom and bring the railroad here. And so, you know, Los Angeles is safe for anybody who comes from anywhere in the world. There's opportunity. There's plenty of land. There's great weather and wonderful health. All of those are still selling points today.
Yeah, that's true.
They're all selling points today.
They really spun a narrative there.
They really did, and it worked. It worked.
There's some staying power.
Yeah, it has definitely had staying power. Well, my great-grandparents were a mixed-race couple. He was Chinese. She was white. They couldn't be legally married. You know, it was against the law in California for Chinese and white people to marry. They lived in Sacramento, which was the capital of the state. So where all the laws were made and all the discriminatory laws were made. And they bought this idea of Los Angeles being safe. And that's what eventually brought them to Los Angeles in 1897. So here's the crazy thing. Where they had their store and lived, and later my grandfather had a restaurant there. My dad lived in that building when he was a teenager in the basement. This is literally a stone's throw from where the massacre started.
Wow.
I mean, and so when I was a little girl, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents down in Los Angeles, Chinatown, and my grandma would take me for walks, and we'd walk over there. Now, today it's just still, I mean, it was when I was little, but even today it was just a vacant lot, a little grassy knoll, because everything, gone after all these years. And my grandmother would talk about the family and that this was where, we got our start in Los Angeles. But she never mentioned the massacre. Never. Wow. And so I my family wouldn't have come here if not for this horrible, horrible thing that happened. And I have this funny connection to it. As horrible as it was, it's also like the seed that planted my family's roots here. It, like right there where it started.
Wow.
That's so cool. I love those moments where you can look back at something unfolding and how you realize like the steps led you to that place. Because I think often we don't know, right? Like often it
Right.
seems kind of random. So
Yeah.
the fact that you have that insight is incredible. Okay, so we told you we were going to delve into this a little more. So it's so interesting to think of history in the context of the present, because so often as we're sort of dancing around here, history seems to repeat itself.
Mhm.
You write in your author's note, the events of October 24th, 1871 have continued to haunt me, not just the tragedy of what happened, but that few people, even here in Los Angeles, seem to have heard about it, and that we are doomed, apparently, to repeat some version of this history. You specifically mentioned anti-Asian hate crimes during the COVID-19 pandemic and more recent rounding up of undocumented immigrants in Southern California and around the country. So can you talk a bit more about how the history you touch on in your book still has so much relevance in the modern day?
Well, I think I did just a few minutes ago, but just to add to that, no, I started this book after the pandemic, so we had already seen this astronomical rise in anti-Asian hate crime and anti-Asian hate speech, but the ICE raids, they had not begun yet. I think the book was done and put to bed by then. But I think we are in many ways doomed to repeat our mistakes. So, you take this 1871 massacre, and as I just said, city fathers this is never going to happen again. This is going to be a great place. We'll never let it happen again. And you spring forward, and there are the Watts riots in the 1960s. After that, we're never going to let this happen again. This is a great city. We're looking forward. It's going to be safe. And then you spring forward to what happened after the Rodney King verdicts.
Yep.
So we learn. I think we do learn, and then we forget. You learn for a while, and then the memory of it may not be in the forefront of people's minds, or it's another generation, and they didn't live through that moment. I hope that we may take 3 steps forward and fall a step back, or 2 steps back. But I do think we continue to move forward.
Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly my hope. It's my worldview. I don't know if you guys agree with it, but we for sure our country is in a better, as difficult as things may seem.
Sure.
We are in a better place than we, let's say, were in 1870, or in the 1860s during the Civil War. So, for every step back, we have to keep remembering that we do move forward. It's just, I do wish we could learn a little better from our mistakes and keep the memory alive in a better way.
Well, I feel like that's one of the important jobs that historical fiction does, though, right? I mean, we're drawing people into that history to remind them of what happened, so that they're, how to do better in the future.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the great things about historical fiction. For me, and I love turning the pages to see, will the guy get the girl? Whatever the plot is.
Yeah.
Will people fall in love? Will they be together at the end? But you are learning so much, and I just speak for myself. But when I can look at history of the past and see how it relates to today, no matter what the culture is, it doesn't matter whether you're writing about Paris or some other, you connect to that history and think about our own lives.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
And what we would do, like what would I do in that moment? Would I be loyal? Would I betray someone? Would I be brave? Would I be a coward? Would I rise to the occasion? Would I fail? And I don't know how you feel about it, but I think when we're doing that as readers, that we're connecting to this idea, it sounds very highfalutin, but, connecting to this idea of humanity.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to be human?
Yes.
And that's to me is the great thing about historical fiction, all fiction really, but historical fiction in particular.
Well, I also feel like I feel like reading historical fiction is also a good reminder that wherever we are in time, wherever we come from, like we're really all the same at our core. I mean,
Exactly.
we want the same things. Like you might go into a story thinking, I'm not going to be able to identify with these events that happened 150 years ago to people with a different background than I have. But I think you fall into a story like that and think, I could have just as easily been there. I could imagine
Right.
myself in those shoes. And I
Yeah.
think, it helps connect us all.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear this from the two of you, because I feel like as a child, as a middle schooler, as a high schooler, I can look back on my life at these little moments and these certain books that I read where that happened to me, where, I'm reading, I remember reading like Chinua Achebe in middle school and being like, wow, like I'm like these people too, like you really, you may
Exactly.
not consciously think that, but you have this. Do you think that connection helps make us writers? Like, do you think there's something in that makes us like, I want to be able to bring that to other people?
No, that's a good question.
Because I don't know if everyone has those moments. I'll be interested. I'm gonna ask some friends.
But actually, if you think about it, in a story, maybe these people use a teapot. Well, I use a coffee pot.
Right.
But there are things that are universal.
Yeah.
That we all had a mother somewhere along the way. We all had a father somewhere. Maybe you knew them, maybe you didn't. Maybe those were nice people, maybe they weren't. But that is the universal.
Yeah.
We all have certain emotions that we share.
Yeah.
We all long for love. We've all had moments of jealousy or envy or hatred. Again, these are the universals, and the circumstances that are happening around may be very, very different.
Wow.
But I think we can connect. That's what, at least when I'm reading, that's what I connect to, and especially those relationships and emotions. I think that there's a reason why there's so many love stories in the world. Right?
Yeah.
We all long for love.
Love.
We've all at some point or another fallen in love, fallen out of love, had our hearts broken by love. So we all share in those.
You are
I was listening to a man on Instagram today. I wish I had shared this video, but he was not a reader, and he has started reading to like just better himself. And he was reading all these classics, and he was like, I just didn't realize. He's like, this has totally changed my life. It's changed my worldview. Because he's like, these people like 200 years ago, they like thought the same stuff I do. And he's like, so all these people out there that I thought were so different from me, they're thinking the same thing I'm thinking. It's just really interesting. Like, because I think as readers, we feel like that's innate. But I think for people who are not readers, they don't have that. They don't get that. So it's interesting.
But I think that's also a really wonderful thing is when people come back to reading as adults.
Yes.
That when we're in school, I mean, I'm sure some of your books have been assigned in schools. Whenever I hear that, I just think, oh, I'm so sorry. Because nothing ruins a book more than being assigned to read it for a class. But then when you read it out of choice, and I think like the man you were just talking about, this has opened up something for him that maybe his past experiences when he was in high school, let's say, or in college. Yeah. That's just not how we read, or how you should be reading.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
For the class.
It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So before we keep going, and we do have a little bit more to chat with Lisa about, I wanted to remind everyone out there watching and listening to rush out and buy your copies of Daughters of the Sun and Moon. The perfect place to do that is in the Friends and Fiction shop on bookshop.org. You will not only be getting the book at a discount, but all your purchases there support our show, our guests, and indie bookstores nationwide. Bookshop has raised an astounding $50 million for indie booksellers. So shop there online when you cannot get out to an indie in person.
Okay, so now back to you, Lisa. I just wanted to point out to readers that you have a fabulous book club kit on your website, lisac.com, and that there's also a special tea package readers can order in honor of Dove, Moon, and Petal. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I do have book club questions. There's also a section called Step Inside the World of whatever the book is. So it's, in this case, Daughters of the Sun and Moon, where I have photographs, videos, on all kinds of subjects. I think the one for Daughters of the Sun and Moon, because it has 29 different subjects that you can then dive deeper, and so instead of going and just looking for yourself, it's all right there. And then with the tea kit, this actually began back with Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, that the woman who had really helped me with the research for that book has a small tea company, and she created a tea package that went with that book. And it was very successful. We did it again for Lady Tan's Circle of Women, and now for this book. And so there's the three characters, Dove, Moon, and Petal, all have their own tea.
That's awesome.
And so you can have the package just for yourself. I mean, is there anything better than curling up with a book and having a cup of tea just by yourself? So there's the individual, but also a package that's for a book club of about 10 people. And so, one of the teas that Petal serves to her customers is it's a little ball, a flower that's dried, and you drop it down and it opens up into the flower when the hot water is poured on it. And so the one that we, sometimes that's just to look at it and it's pretty, but this one actually is also a very good drinkable tea as well. So anyway, each of the three characters has her own tea, and I think it's really nice for book clubs, but also if you're just by yourself and need a cup of tea when you're reading.
It's a lovely way to bring the book alive. I mean, you really described the teas well in the book, and I was astounded to get to the end and realize, oh my gosh, I can actually buy these teas. Mm-hmm. That was really cool. All right.
So can I just say, she's just a very small company. So I also feel like it's a nice way to support a woman-owned company.
That's fantastic. All right, Lisa, we know you are already a week into an extensive tour. In the next few days, you'll be with our friends at Booktown in Manasquan, New Jersey, the Doylestown Bookshop just outside Philadelphia, Book Miser in Dunwoody, Georgia, and then down to Books and Books in Coral Gables. But there is so much more to come. I think you're going to be on the road through mid-July, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It's a long tour. It's really exciting. I think it's 28 official stops, but there are another 3 that are, private events. And it's going to be, it is very intense, but it's so incredible. And I know you guys have had this of getting out there and meeting readers and hearing the questions that they have and how something is at the beginning of a tour when no one has read the book.
Yes.
And then you get about a week in or 2 weeks in, and now people have read it and they're responding to it and asking questions about it and how it touches them emotionally. And I don't know for you guys, but I always feel like I learn a lot about my writing.
Yes, same. Yeah,
when I'm out there.
That. We're like, wait, I wish I'd been saying that on my whole talk. Like someone's
exactly
about your book, and you're like, yes.
Yeah, yes. Or they'll say, what about this theme? And I was like, oh yeah, that's in there. But sometimes it's not in our conscious forefront.
Yeah,
but it's in there. It's just we haven't really realized it. So I think that's my favorite thing about going out there. And as the tour goes on and people have read it and can really, tell you things about it that you didn't know yourself.
We talk about that all the time. It's funny that we said that.
You really see your book through a different lens, I think, when you see it through readers' eyes. Lisa, where can we find out more about your tour dates so that our...
on my website, it's right there on my website, lisac.com, and then there's a whole events page. And then I'm not really great at it, but I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Threads, and I'm trying to put up all of the events. I don't manage every single day, but I'm really trying. I mean, it's harder, when you're traveling, but I'm trying.
Sure. Kristy's so good at all that stuff, and with me, I always have to remind myself. Kristy just does it naturally.
You're really good at it, though. You're good at it, though.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. We love having you. We love talking to you, and we really liked this book.
Thank you so much, and it's just such a pleasure to get to talk to other writers, and you both have insights about writing that other interviewers don't necessarily have. Trying to delicate about that.
Well,
But
no.
it's just, I want you to know how much I appreciate that. And it just means a lot to be able to talk to other writers about this crazy thing that we do.
It's so true. We completely agree. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Lisa. So everyone out there, be sure to tune in next week when Ron and Mary Kay Andrews welcome Lisa Jewell to discuss her new novel, It Could Have Been Her. That show will air on the Friends and Fiction Facebook page and YouTube channel on Wednesday, June 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and it will be published to our podcast for your listening pleasure on Friday, June 26th.
Thank you to all of you out there for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to Friends and Fiction, hosted by New York Times bestselling authors Mary Kay Andrews, Patty Callahan Henry, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Kristin Harmel. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, subscribe to our Substack newsletter, and catch us on Facebook and YouTube, where a new episode of our show airs every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen to Friends and Fiction wherever you get your podcasts. Find out about all this and more at friendsandfiction.com. We're so glad you're here.